Every morning, I watched him tie his tie with smug precision, the way he admired himself in the mirror like he was preparing to dominate the world. Nathan Wells, Vice President of Operations at Orion Systems, my husband, though that word had begun to feel like a stale joke. He called me his lovely wife, said it like a label rather than a person. Unemployed, he'd remind people with a chuckle. She dabbles in hobbies, he'd say at dinner parties. As if I were some overindulged housecat lounging in luxury he provided. I played the part well, just the right balance of quiet grace and subtle charm. But behind the soft smiles and modest dresses was a woman he never bothered to ask about. And that suited me perfectly. Nathan never questioned where the money came from to pay off his absurd car, or how he managed to keep a second home in Napa despite his barely mid-six-figure salary. I had always let him believe he was the king of our world. He didn't need to know that I built Orion Systems. Every code line, every acquisition, every boardroom maneuver, it all came from me. Evelyn Blake, hidden behind a labyrinth of shell corporations, legal proxies, and strategic obfuscation. I was the founder, the CEO, the architect. He thought I was sleeping in on weekdays, sipping wine in yoga pants while he drove into a company I had built from dust. The irony wasn't lost on me. I still remembered the day Orion was born in my tiny apartment, fueled by caffeine and fury. I'd been passed over for a promotion, told I lacked the polish for leadership. I poured every rejection into the framework of Orion. No investors, no noise. Just progress. I created subsidiaries, buried the source, and let male faces serve as the company's public image while I orchestrated everything from behind the curtain. By the time Nathan applied, I had already approved his hire. A calculated move. I wanted to see how long it would take for him to reveal his true colors. I didn't have to wait long. He was competent, sure, but his real skill lay in schmoozing. He loved posturing in front of junior staff, loved the sound of his own voice in strategy meetings. The board tolerated him because I did. They didn't know the full truth either, just that I was a quiet, invisible founder with controlling shares and absolute authority. My decision to remain anonymous wasn't about fear. It was about freedom. I could move without being watched, influence without resistance. It also let me see who people really were when they thought no one important was watching. Nathan was a fascinating case study. At home, he was dismissive and aloof, treating me more like an accessory than a partner. "Don't worry your pretty head about it," he'd say when I asked about his day. Operations talk, he'd smirk as if it would go over my head. I'd nod politely, inwardly filing away every smug anecdote about office politics, every careless confession about cutting corners or pushing toxic employees into promotions to protect his allies. I collected information like a crow gathering shiny things, except my treasures were strategic leverage, receipts of misconduct, patterns of corruption. And there were so many. There were nights I'd lie awake beside him, my mind humming with the weight of it all. Orion had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, and yet I was still pretending to be nobody. Was it cowardice or brilliance? I asked myself that often. But every time I watched Nathan mansplain budget sheets or interrupt women in meetings, yes, I watched every board recording, I felt the patience harden into purpose. My silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. I had systems in place. Trusted allies embedded in legal, in compliance, in tech. People who'd worked for the parent company without ever knowing I was the parent. It was almost funny. I had built a digital empire and managed to stay invisible to the man who bragged about running it. But something had shifted lately. The misconduct was growing bolder. The executives, Nathan's little clique, were pushing unethical contracts, harassing junior staff, pressuring HR to cover their tracks. The arrogance had metastasized. And Nathan, ever the peacock, was at the center of it. That was the moment I knew the game was almost over. I was done hiding. But I couldn't just show up and blow it all open. No, that wasn't justice. That was noise. I wanted consequence, not chaos. So I started the final phase of the plan, one that required precision, evidence, and, most of all, restraint. That meant attending events with Nathan, smiling at people who spat quiet insults into my wine glass. It meant letting him believe, for just a little longer, that I was beneath him. That I had nothing to offer but idle chatter and a pretty face. He didn't know that I owned the house he lived in. He didn't know I signed the checks that paid for his life. He didn't know the staff he looked down on were already quietly aligning with me. But soon, he would. They all would. And when the time came, it wouldn't be a scream. It would be a reckoning. Clean. Surgical. I wouldn't just expose them, I would replace them. Brick by brick, ego by ego. I would burn down the illusion and rebuild it in my name. But for now, I smiled as Nathan kissed my cheek goodbye and told me not to wait up. I watched him leave for work at my company, believing it was his. I closed the door, poured myself coffee, and opened my laptop. It was time. The laughter echoed from the kitchen, sharp and brittle like glass cracking under pressure. I stood in the hallway with a tray of champagne flutes, watching as Nathan leaned against the marble island, recounting one of his favorite stories, one where I was the punchline. "She tried to help me with a budget spreadsheet once," he said, grinning at the assembled group of Orion's upper executives. Bless her heart. She got confused halfway through and ended up formatting the entire thing in Comic Sans. The room roared with laughter. I stepped forward, my face serene, hands steady as I offered each man and woman a glass. My smile didn't falter, not even when Kent Morrison, the CFO, patted my shoulder condescendingly and said, "At least you're pretty, Evelyn." That's something, right? I nodded politely and moved on. Every insult was a thread, weaving together the final tapestry I needed. They had no idea they were standing in the middle of a trap designed by the very woman they ridiculed. I had spent years curating this moment, gathering proof not only of their arrogance, but of their violations, contract tampering, hostile work environments, misallocated resources. But tonight was about more than data. It was about watching them dig the hole deeper with every cruel word they spat. I drifted from the kitchen to the living room, taking note of who spoke the loudest, who laughed the hardest. These were the same men who thought they were untouchable, who had buried complaints in HR and manipulated stock options like poker chips. Their wives milled around in carefully curated clusters, whispering about spa weekends and real estate investments. None of them knew who I really was. To them, I was just Nathan's failed project, a woman too lazy or too soft to work, content with hosting parties and managing caterers. Nathan called me over. "Evelyn, sweetheart, come remind us, what was that thing you wanted to launch a few years ago? Something with tech." His smirk was already loaded, waiting to fire. I joined the circle, let the warmth of humiliation wash over me like an old coat I hadn't worn in years. "Oh," I said sweetly, "just a silly idea. Nothing that would have gotten past your expertise, I'm sure." The men laughed again. God, they loved laughing at me. I watched their faces, Kent, Frank from compliance, Tanya from strategy, who only laughed when the others did, always a step behind. And Nathan, standing in the center of them all like some smug little son. He loved this. The attention, the hierarchy, the sense that he could publicly diminish me and still expect me to make his coffee in the morning. "Remember when she tried to get a job at Orion?" Nathan added, eyes gleaming. "Didn't even get past screening. I told her it'd be too stressful." The truth was, I had never tried. I'd sat behind the screen approving every new hire. But tonight, I let the lie live. I tilted my head. "Probably for the best," I murmured. "Sounds like the culture would have been challenging." Kent laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "Challenging? That's a nice way to put it. We're sharks, Evelyn. You wouldn't have lasted a week." My grip tightened slightly around my glass. Sharks. No, they were leeches. Sucking talent dry, pushing women out with subtle toxicity, promoting each other in a carousel of mediocrity. I had data on all of it. Internal memos, HR reports they'd buried, exit interviews they never thought anyone would review. I'd collected it all quietly, like the good little hostess they thought I was. As the evening wore on, I made my way to my office upstairs, the one Nathan assumed I used for Pinterest boards and recipe organization. I closed the door and slid the latch. On my desk, my laptop screen was already lit up with a silent video feed from the living room below. The audio streamed in real time. Every snide comment, every half-drunk confession about misusing company funds or gaslighting employees, it was all being captured. Crystal clear. I opened a second window. My legal team, 3 women I trusted implicitly, were monitoring everything remotely, filing notes, cross-referencing incidents with existing reports. Every cruel word tonight was just more icing. More proof that these people didn't just think they were above accountability. They'd built an entire ecosystem to protect their entitlement. And my husband? He was their king. I watched him toast to the future of Orion, smiling like he hadn't been skimming credit for my innovations for years. He had no idea that the house he stood in was wired for sound. No clue that every document he left in the study had been scanned and cataloged. He truly believed I was nothing. And that made his downfall all the sweeter. Downstairs, the laughter was winding down, the wine bottles near empty. I returned just in time to hand out coats and kisses, smiling as the wolves departed one by one, satisfied with their evening of mockery. Nathan kissed my cheek again, still grinning. "You did good, babe. Everyone loves when you play the hostess." I smiled, just doing my part. When the door finally closed, I locked it. I stood in the quiet and let the silence wrap around me like armor. They had no idea. But soon, they would. Tonight was the last time I'd ever let them laugh at me. The first thing that hit me when I stepped into Orion's headquarters as Maya Torres was the silence behind the smiles. It wasn't the kind of silence that welcomed you. It was the kind that warned you. The front desk receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes, glanced at me briefly before plastering on a forced smile. "You here for the intake screening?" she asked, already bored. "Yes," I said, adjusting the boxy blazer that did nothing for my frame, but everything for my disguise. My hair was dyed a muted brown, my makeup plain, my posture uncertain by design. Maya Torres was a composite of every overlooked applicant I had ever seen dismissed in this very building. No power walk. No sharp suits. Just a woman trying to get her foot in the door. She handed me a laminated visitor badge and waved toward the waiting area without another word. I sat, clutching a fake resume and a genuine folder of notes. The camera in my glasses was already rolling, capturing every sideways glance and half-heard conversation. I watched a man in a navy suit approach the receptionist and openly gawk at a female employee walking by. "If HR gives us another harassment training, I swear to God," he muttered. Strike one. They called me back after 20 minutes, no apology for the wait. A wiry man with thinning hair and a barely-there smile led me into a small conference room. "Greg Lewis," he said without looking at me. "HR support, but mostly I handle onboarding these days. We're understaffed, so let's get this over with." Charming. He glanced at my resume and scoffed. "Community college, okay. Some admin work. And you think you're ready for a corporate role at Orion?" "I thought I'd start with operations support and grow from there," I said evenly. Greg leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Lot of people think that. You'll probably end up fetching coffee for someone like me for a while. Still interested?" I nodded. Strike two. He began the rest of the interview in the laziest, most dismissive way possible. Half-hearted questions, eye rolls at my answers, and then, finally, the kicker. "Look, this isn't a place for hand-holding. You need thick skin. It gets a little aggressive around here. But hey, if you can keep your mouth shut and do what you're told, maybe you'll survive." I thanked him and followed him to a different room, where a young woman named Lisa handed me a stack of onboarding documents and mumbled something about the toxic culture. She didn't even look up. Her tone was flat, eyes dulled. I'd seen that look before, in exit interviews, in feedback loops that never made it to leadership. She was surviving, not living. By midday, I'd been introduced to a supervisor who clearly hadn't read my file. "You're the new assistant?" "Finally. I've had to make my own meeting notes for a week," he said, handing me a folder without so much as a welcome. He didn't tell me where to sit, didn't ask if I had questions. Just dropped work into my lap and walked off. The other employees were too busy or too afraid to engage. Every cubicle held someone pretending not to hear the aggressive tone from the corner office, the passive-aggressive sniping in the break room. And above it all hung a strange tension, the feeling that if you weren't constantly proving your worth, you were disposable. At lunch, I sat in the far corner of the cafeteria, watching the cliques form around tables like high school. The executives had their own zone, loud, arrogant, careless. Nathan wasn't there today, thankfully. But his protégés were. One of them, Andrew from Strategy, openly mocked a junior analyst's haircut. If we wanted creativity, we'd hire artists, he said, and everyone laughed. My jaw tightened. Strike 3. I stood quietly, pretending to dump my tray, and made a mental note of everyone at the table. I already had their HR files. I knew which complaints had mysteriously vanished. Now, I had faces and voices to match. By the end of the day, I had a headache, not from the work, which was insultingly basic, but from the culture. Every minute in that building proved what I had suspected for years. The rot wasn't just in leadership. It had trickled down into the walls, into the desks, into the way people spoke to each other. The toxicity was embedded. I returned home exhausted but not defeated. I locked myself in my private study, removed the wig, and pulled out the voice transcripts and footage. Every violation was time-stamped and labeled. Greg's inappropriate remarks. Andrew's bullying. The lack of structure, the procedural violations, the open disdain for women. I sent the files to my legal team, tagging them for the official report. Operation Ember, I labeled the folder. Let them laugh. Let them think Maya Torres was just another forgettable applicant. They'd see the footage soon enough, along with termination notices and audit requests. I stared at the screen and allowed myself one moment of stillness. For years, I had built this company in silence. Now, I was exposing it in the same way. Quietly. Completely. Tomorrow, the masks would come off. I didn't knock. I walked through the front doors of Orion Systems with my head high and my heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. There was no disguise today. No Maya Torres, no plain blazers or downcast eyes. Today, I wore the power they thought I never had. A tailored black suit with sharp lines, hair swept back, red lipstick drawn with unwavering precision. I wasn't here to fit in. I was here to end the illusion. The receptionist looked up and blinked as if she didn't quite recognize me. I didn't stop at the desk. "Good morning," I said without breaking stride. "I'm here for the board meeting." I didn't offer a badge or an explanation. I simply walked forward, through the security doors, past HR, past the finance department, all of whom turned to stare as I passed. Some of them knew me, vaguely. Nathan's wife. The quiet one. The hostess. None of them had ever seen me like this. I stepped into the elevator and hit the top floor. My reflection in the mirrored doors looked exactly how I felt, composed, ruthless, unshakable. Every second of ridicule, every smirk and whispered insult over the years lived in the steel of my spine this morning. I had given them enough rope. Now it was time to watch it tighten. The boardroom doors were already open, laughter echoing inside. Nathan's voice carried above the rest. "She actually asked me if AI stands for artificial investment," he said, and they all cackled like they were still at our kitchen island, treating my intelligence like a party trick. I stepped through the doorway. The room fell silent. 10 executives stared at me as if they had seen a ghost. Nathan stood slowly, confusion knitting across his brow, unsure whether this was some kind of mistake. "Evelyn," he said, half laughing, half cautious. "What are you?" "Sit down," I said. It wasn't loud, but it sliced the air. Nathan didn't move. I said sit. He sat. I walked to the head of the table, the chair that had always been left symbolically empty during board meetings, as if awaiting some unseen overseer. Today, it was mine. I placed a thick folder onto the polished wood and let my eyes travel across the room. Kent, Frank, Tanya. Greg from HR. Andrew from Strategy. Their faces shifted from amusement to unease. They knew something was wrong, but not how wrong. "I want to thank all of you for being here," I began, voice calm. "You've built quite a culture at Orion. Cutthroat. Dismissive. Dangerous. I've had the pleasure of experiencing it firsthand. Kent laughed nervously. I'm sorry, I'm not following. Are you giving some kind of presentation? No, Kent. I'm giving terminations. I opened the folder and began sliding copies down the table. Legal documents. Audit reports. HR complaints. Signed confessions. Time-stamped video footage. Each page was another nail in the coffin they built for themselves while laughing at me. I am Evelyn Blake, I said, founder and CEO of Orion Systems. I've owned this company since its inception. Every shell company, every proxy, every investor, mine. I've operated anonymously for strategic reasons. But recent events have forced my hand. Nathan stood again, pale. This is some kind of joke. You can't. I can, I said, turning to him. And I did. You're fired, Nathan. Effective immediately. So is everyone else at this table. Chaos erupted. Voices rose, papers were thrown, someone cursed under their breath. Tanya looked like she might faint. Greg sputtered something about HR protocol. Frank tried to talk over me. I held up my hand and silence followed. Your emails are locked. Your access revoked. Security is waiting in the hallway to escort each of you out. Legal is prepared to issue individual statements of cause. You've violated company policies, state labor laws, and ethical guidelines. In some cases, federal law. I suggest you leave quietly and contact your lawyers. Nathan's voice was a low hiss now. You tricked me. You lied to me. No, Nathan, I said, you lied to yourself. You assumed I was nothing because it was easier than admitting your wife might be your superior in every way. He stared at me like a man watching his house burn from the front lawn, powerless to stop it. The arrogance had drained from his face, leaving behind something small. Pathetic. Security entered on cue, flanking the room in silence. One by one, the executives were asked to collect their things. Some shouted. Others begged. Frank slammed a chair against the wall. Tanya whispered apologies she should have spoken years ago. And Nathan? He just stood there, watching me, mouth open but words gone. I didn't flinch. As the door closed behind the last of them, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Alone now, I turned toward the glass wall overlooking the city. My city. My company. I had walked through fire and come out steel. And this was only the beginning. The air inside Orion felt different now, clearer, like someone had finally opened a window in a smoke-filled room. The corridors no longer vibrated with tension or whispered cruelties. The echo of yesterday's storm still lingered, but beneath it pulsed something else: order. Reclamation. Justice. I sat at the head of the boardroom table once more, this time surrounded not by vultures, but by the legal, HR, and security teams I had handpicked and prepared for months. They had known something big was coming, though not the full picture until now. Their eyes were sharp, their loyalty unwavering. These weren't the yes-men Nathan surrounded himself with. These were professionals who understood the stakes. Let's begin, I said, opening the master list on my laptop. Names, departments, infractions, everything cataloged in ruthless detail. The system I'd built over the past year had monitored internal communications, flagged suspicious transactions, and compiled patterns of abuse. Nathan and his cronies were only the first wave. The HR lead, Serena Marks, adjusted her glasses. The files are all cross-referenced. Documentation is airtight. We've identified 43 personnel whose terminations are ready to execute today. All for cause. No severance, no lawsuits that will stick. My voice remained calm. Then execute them. It began like clockwork. Emails triggered. Access codes revoked. Building credentials disabled. One by one, the dominoes fell. Security escorted each person out with professionalism. No spectacle, no chaos. Some left quietly, heads bowed. Others demanded to speak to someone above. They didn't know there was no one above me. By mid-morning, Orion's leadership tiers had been stripped down to their foundations. No more backroom deals, no more whispered threats in hallways. The old guard had been rooted out, exposed, and discarded like rotted wood. I watched from the executive balcony as Nathan stood outside the building, phone in hand, eyes wild. He was yelling into the receiver, probably trying to call a board member, not knowing most of them had already been briefed and had signed off on every move I made today. His voice was muffled by glass, but I didn't need to hear it. I knew the tone. Desperate. Rattled. He'd never imagined the woman who ironed his shirts and arranged his dinner parties was the one who could dismantle his life with a single sentence. Serena approached quietly. The divorce papers were filed this morning. Copies have been served to his legal counsel. Thank you, I said without turning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about removal. Nathan wasn't just a bad husband. He was a rot inside a system I had built to be better. And I was done watching it spread. By noon, Jasmine from legal joined me in the boardroom, handing me the final stack of signed exit agreements. They knew it was coming, she said, settling into the seat beside me. Not the details, but they knew they'd gone too far. They always do, I murmured, flipping through the pages. But they assume no one powerful enough will ever hold them accountable. Jasmine studied me for a moment. Why now? I met her gaze. Because it's time. The company can't evolve until we clear the deadweight. We can't innovate while the people leading us are dragging us back into toxic patterns. I built this company with a vision. It's time I start honoring that. She nodded, then smiled faintly. You should speak to the staff. That suggestion settled over me with weight. I had never publicly addressed the employees as Evelyn Blake, founder and CEO. I had always remained a shadow, a signature on strategic directives, a quiet force behind the curtain. But now, the curtain had fallen. And it was time to lead from the front. I took the elevator down to the main floor. The atrium buzzed with anxious energy. Whispers stopped the moment I entered, hundreds of eyes turning toward me, curious, wary, stunned. I stepped up onto the small presentation platform used for product launches and holiday announcements. The mic was already set. I took a breath. I know many of you are confused, I began. My voice echoed through the open space. You've seen people leave this morning. You've heard rumors. I'm here to give you clarity. I paused, let the silence settle before continuing. My name is Evelyn Blake. I am the founder and CEO of Orion Systems. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged stunned glances. A few jaws dropped. For years, I remained behind the scenes. I did it to protect the company while it grew. But I've watched as a culture of arrogance, corruption, and intimidation took root within these walls. That ends today. The individuals who perpetuated that culture have been removed. Not quietly, not politely, but thoroughly, and with cause. I could see it now, relief blooming in cautious expressions, hope dawning in a few eyes. This is your company now. Not theirs. We will rebuild. We will rise. And this time, everyone will be seen. The applause began hesitantly, but it grew. First a ripple, then a wave. It wasn't roaring, not yet. But it was real. And that was enough for now. I stepped down from the platform and walked through the crowd, not as a stranger, but as the woman who had always been there, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. The purge was complete. Now we rebuild. The storm had passed, but the sky was far from clear. Clearing Orion of its internal rot was only the beginning. The public still believed Nathan and his allies were competent executives. Investors had no idea how close their trust had come to being exploited. And regulators? They'd only seen the tip of the iceberg. If I wanted real change, lasting change, I had to take this further. So, I launched Operation Eclipse. It started with a whisper, a carefully timed leak to a respected business journalist, anonymously, of course. A single sentence embedded in a broader article about corporate ethics, rumors of misconduct, and insider dealings among Orion Systems' former executive tier suggest deeper regulatory violations. It was enough to raise eyebrows but not trigger panic. Just a tremor. Just the beginning. From there, the dominoes began to fall. The media latched onto the story like wolves scenting blood. I didn't give them everything at once. I released what I needed them to find, bit by bit. Internal memos showing mishandled audits. Emails that hinted at backdoor deals. A whistleblower report, written months earlier under a pseudonym, suddenly surfaced. I had written it myself, filed through a third-party portal using an alias tied to one of the shell companies I'd created in Orion's infancy. Next, I set the stage for the SEC. Through one of our international subsidiaries, I had a compliance contact, someone who had been burned by Nathan's policies in the past and was more than willing to flag patterns that might suggest insider trading. We submitted the data anonymously, backed by transaction records I had been quietly collecting. Nathan and 2 others had sold stock just before certain internal reports were lost. Those reports later reappeared, curiously altered. My team cross-referenced dates, times, access logs. It was airtight. Simultaneously, I instructed our cyber division, now under new leadership, to begin a quiet sweep of all communications tied to those former executives. We weren't just looking for misconduct. We were looking for patterns. When they contacted outside firms, what they said to investors, who they confided in when the walls started closing in. We found deleted messages, encrypted attachments, phone logs with competitors. All of it cataloged. All of it ready. My office became a war room. Monitors lined the walls, each one streaming live feeds of stock sentiment, legal movements, PR reactions, and regulator inquiries. I sat at the center of it, no longer in disguise, no longer in hiding. This was the command post of a woman done playing small. Jasmine, my legal lead, entered one morning with a grim smile. We've confirmed at least 3 NDAs were violated. Nathan sent confidential data to a contact at Praxis Labs. They were trying to poach our AI model. Have we contacted Praxis yet? I asked. We didn't need to, she replied. I leaked the story to the Times instead. They'll deny everything, but their board will see the smoke and start digging. I smiled. Good. Let their own fear do half the work. Each day brought another wave. The media began using the phrase Orion scandal, though I made sure every mention drew a line between the old leadership and the new. A prepared statement from me was released just as things began to escalate. Orion Systems remains committed to ethical innovation. We are cooperating fully with regulators and will hold all former employees accountable for actions taken under their tenure. The stock dipped for 2 days. Just 2. That's when the second phase began, our buyback program. I had predicted the panic. While others were selling, we were buying. Every dip was an opportunity, every rumor a smokescreen. Orion wasn't crumbling, it was consolidating. Behind the scenes, I restructured internal policies. Every contract now had stricter clauses around data security, financial transparency, and executive accountability. We implemented whistleblower protections, not just in writing but in action, offering incentives and confidentiality for employees who helped rebuild our ethical framework. People started coming forward. Not out of fear, but out of belief. They saw the shift. They wanted to be part of it. Nathan, meanwhile, was unraveling. Surveillance footage, gathered legally through the PI firm I'd retained, showed him meeting in backlots, arguing with his former colleagues, shouting into phones. He tried reaching out to former clients, pleading his case, blaming a vendetta. But the clients were already mine. I had called them personally, laid out the truth before the scandal broke. They had thanked me for the honesty. They didn't trust him. They trusted me. One evening, I sat alone in the office, watching a news segment play out. The anchor's voice was smooth, but the words were sharp. Former Orion executives are under preliminary investigation for securities fraud and possible collusion with outside firms. Sources suggest anonymous internal leadership was responsible for the exposure. Anonymous leadership. Still, they hadn't connected the dots. Some speculated it was a new board member, maybe even a rogue whistleblower. But none of them guessed that the quiet wife they had mocked at parties was the one rewriting their legacy from the inside out. Operation Eclipse wasn't just about punishment, it was about illumination. Everything they tried to hide, I dragged into the light. Every lie they told was met with the truth they never expected me to carry. And the best part? I wasn't even done yet. I watched the first lawsuit drop like a stone in water, sharp, predictable, and ultimately powerless. Nathan's name headlined it, flanked by the same old arrogance that had once filled our living room like cheap cologne. Wrongful termination, it claimed. Defamation, he added in the press. As if he were the one who'd been betrayed. As if losing a position he never earned equated to injustice. I barely blinked. The strategy was tired before it even reached the courtroom. And I had already anticipated every move. My legal team was surgical. Jasmine filed the counter with calm precision, attaching receipts, dozens of them. HR complaints buried under Nathan's direction. Insider trading patterns with time-stamped trades. Messages to competitors masked as industry discussions. Our documents were airtight, our timestamps unimpeachable. The judge barely glanced at Nathan's plea before rejecting it on procedural grounds. That was just the beginning of the unraveling. Frank, Kent, Andrew, they followed in quick succession, each one tossing accusations like drowning men flailing in shallow water. They reached out to former clients, hoping someone, anyone, would remember their names with fondness. But I had already been there. Long before the media frenzy, I made the calls. I didn't send a PR team, I called them myself. I told them the truth. I told them the house had termites, and I had fumigated. Some were skeptical at first. But as the headlines rolled in and the SEC's interest grew, the picture sharpened. Former clients didn't just side with me, they cut ties with Nathan's entire circle. Contracts were canceled. Invitations revoked. Doors slammed shut. Nathan, ever the optimist when it came to his own image, tried pivoting. He launched a podcast, Corporate Clarity with Nathan Wells. The first episode was a disaster. He tried to paint himself as a misunderstood visionary. Sometimes real leadership looks like chaos before it's recognized, he said, his voice forced into some pseudo-intellectual tone. The episode had fewer than 1,000 listens before it was flooded with scathing reviews. Most of them weren't from strangers. They were from former Orion employees, junior staffers who remembered exactly what Nathan's leadership had looked like: public shaming, passive-aggressive emails, meetings where credit was stolen and blame was weaponized. Meanwhile, the regulators moved in. The SEC subpoenaed his financial records first, then Frank's. Jasmine handed over our internal audit findings with professional detachment. We didn't gloat. We didn't need to. The data spoke louder than any press release. Antitrust flags started waving when Andrew's old deals revealed informal collusion with two of Orion's competitors. They had been price-fixing, manipulating bids. All of it documented. All of it surfacing now, like bones washed up from a flood. One by one, their assets froze. Nathan's accounts went under review. His secondary property in Palm Springs, purchased through suspicious offshore transfers, was seized for investigation. Kent's consulting firm shuttered overnight after half his clients walked away. Andrew's email to Praxis Labs, begging for a job, was leaked online. "I'm being targeted by a bitter executive with a vendetta," he wrote. The irony nearly made me laugh. They tried banding together. Nathan organized a meeting in some hotel conference room and called it a strategic comeback summit. I received a copy of the flyer. It was printed in Comic Sans. I let them scramble. I let them write op-eds and post vague threats on social media. Every word they published only pushed the regulators further. Every denial they offered made them look guiltier. Their desperation was loud, and the world was finally listening. At night, I'd sit in my office, the lights dimmed, the city pulsing beyond the glass. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. I had carried the weight of silence for years. Now I watched it shift, cracking open the hollow men who thought they could float on charm and power forever. They were exposed now. Not because I shouted, but because I let the truth speak without flinching. One evening, Serena came in with an update. Nathan's frozen out of all personal and business accounts. His attorney called ours to ask about settlement. I raised a brow. He's negotiating? She nodded, panicking. Good. Let him panic. Let him taste what it's like to not be in control for once. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline, Orion's name glowing at the top of our headquarters, no longer tainted by the men who tried to poison it. They had underestimated me because I smiled too politely, stayed too quiet, stood too still. But they forgot that stillness isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And now they were broken. Not because I tore them apart, but because I simply stopped holding them up. The meeting room was deliberately unremarkable: clean lines, white walls, a single long table of polished oak, and no company logos. I chose it for its neutrality, a place that wouldn't echo power or offer comfort. Let them feel the emptiness. Let them sit in the silence and think about everything they used to have. One by one, they arrived, their suits less pressed, their eyes less certain. Nathan came last, of course, sunglasses on indoors like the world still cared what he looked like. They hadn't spoken much since being escorted out of Orion, but now they glanced at one another, uneasy, unsure who might flip first. They didn't know what this was, only that my office had summoned them. That was enough to make them come. Desperation had a way of making even the proud obedient. I stepped into the room and let the door click shut behind me. No lawyers, no assistants. Just me. Sit, I said. And they did. I stood at the head of the table, arms loosely crossed, watching them squirm. I didn't need a speech this time. I needed precision. You've all spent weeks pretending to be victims, I began, my voice even. You've cried foul to the press, filed flimsy lawsuits, sent desperate emails to former clients. None of it worked. Your reputations are gone. Your assets are frozen. The SEC is circling, and you're burning bridges faster than you can rebuild them. They said nothing. Nathan's jaw clenched. Kent looked away. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Now you're here because you think this is a negotiation, I continued. It's not. This is the only mercy you're going to get. I dropped a file folder on the table, the thud echoing in the quiet. Inside were the cooperation agreements, ironclad legal documents offering each of them a simple choice. Here's the deal, I said. You sign these, you cooperate with all regulatory investigations, you admit what you've done on record, in writing, and in return, I don't pursue further charges. I don't push for maximum penalties. I don't testify against you when the time comes. Frank leaned forward, his voice cracking. Why would you offer us that? I met his eyes. Because I'm not interested in destroying people for the sake of it. I want Orion free of your legacy. I want the company to move forward. But that doesn't mean I'll let you walk away untouched. Nathan scoffed. You think we're just going to confess and hand you everything? I think you already know you've lost, I said coldly. This is your only off-ramp. Kent snatched the folder first, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard. His empire was already dust. His face had been removed from boards, his consulting firm dissolved. He had nothing left to gamble. I'll sign, he said quietly. Nathan turned toward him in disbelief. You're serious? Kent didn't look up. I have a family, Nathan. I'm not going to jail for your ego. Frank followed next, sighing heavily as he picked up the pen. I want this over. I want to breathe again. One by one, the others folded, muttering, sighing, sweating. Some tried to justify it, calling it a reset, a hard lesson, as though they hadn't been complicit in silencing whistleblowers, covering up harassment, and sabotaging careers. I let them speak. I didn't care about their rationalizations. I only cared about the signatures. Only Nathan remained. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, staring at me with that same withering glare he used to give me when I asked too many questions at dinner parties. The glare that once worked. It didn't anymore. You think this makes you better than us? He said. You used us. You married me. You let me believe. I let you reveal who you really were, I interrupted. I gave you every chance to do the right thing. You chose ego. You chose cruelty. And now you can choose prison, or you can choose to take responsibility. His lip curled. This company was nothing until we made it shine. No, I said calmly. This company was something in spite of you. He stood abruptly, shoving his chair back. You can't force me to confess. I don't have to. I already have everything I need. This is just a courtesy. He looked around, saw the others, Kent, Frank, Tanya, all slouched, defeated. The room reeked of surrender. And finally, the bravado slipped. Just a crack. His fingers flexed at his sides. His gaze faltered. I held out the pen. Last chance. Seconds ticked by. Then, without a word, he snatched the pen from my hand and signed. The silence afterward was heavy. Not tension, just the weight of inevitability. Leave, I said. All of you. Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled. And one by one, the broken men filed out. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled slowly, letting the quiet settle into my bones. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And I was far from finished. The morning light hit the windows differently now. It didn't feel like it was filtered through tension or resentment. It just felt clean. The offices buzzed with a strange, hopeful energy, as if the entire building had exhaled. With Nathan and his inner circle gone, the air had changed. People made eye contact. They smiled more. The silences that once screamed were replaced by conversation and laughter that sounded unforced. It was subtle, but I felt it everywhere. Orion was breathing again. I walked through each department, not as a ghost, not as a rumor in the walls, but as myself, Evelyn Blake, the CEO. And now, for the first time, the face that went with the name. It was strange how quickly people adjusted. At first, there were stares, whispers, a few stunned expressions from those who had once walked by me at parties and barely acknowledged me. But the fear I expected never came. What came instead was curiosity. And then, trust. "Morning, Miss Blake," someone said as I passed the tech floor. "Evelyn's fine," I corrected with a smile. "Unless you're mad at me." He grinned, and the tension dissolved. These people didn't need a tyrant in a power suit. They needed a leader who actually listened. And I was ready. I stopped by the AI division next, the place Nathan once referred to as the department with toys but no traction. He'd said it with that dismissive smirk of his, convinced innovation only mattered if it looked good in quarterly projections. But I had always known this division carried the future. I had designed its blueprint myself. Jasmine Reed was there, her sleeves rolled up, eyes bright behind her glasses. She looked up as I approached and immediately started rising from her chair. "Don't get up," I said, waving her down. "I just wanted to see what magic you're making." Her screen displayed a neural net visualizer, pulsing and shifting with the kind of fluid motion that only came from passionate design. I remembered her file. She'd been quietly sidelined for years, overlooked for promotions, talked over in meetings. Nathan once referred to her as too intense, too academic. Now she was leading the division. She gave me a quick, proud rundown of their current model, an adaptive system for client-side learning that would personalize interfaces in real time. It was bold, elegant, exactly the kind of leap Orion needed. "You've got full autonomy," I said when she finished. "Choose your team, pitch directly to me, and if you want, we'll build a prototype by Q3. Her mouth fell open slightly. "Wait, seriously?" "Dead serious." She blinked, then nodded once, hard. "I won't let you down." "I know." I left her office with a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. Belief. Not in the company. In the people. They had always been here, buried under bureaucracy and bias, told to wait their turn while mediocrity rose on the backs of their labor. That era was over. In HR, I met with Serena to finalize the restructure. We had dismantled entire departments, but we didn't leave voids. We rebuilt them with people who had once been ignored, their resumes shuffled to the bottom of stacks by those who feared being outshined. Promotions were now based on innovation, collaboration, empathy. Not politics. We held open forums every Friday, no agenda, no filters. Just me and anyone who wanted to ask a question or suggest a change. The first time, only 5 people showed up. By the 3rd week, we filled the entire auditorium. People wanted to be heard. They wanted to believe the company they worked for wasn't just pretending to change. And I made sure every action proved it. We brought back a group of employees who had quit during Nathan's tenure. Some came cautiously, unsure if this was real. But the moment they walked back into Orion and saw the changes, the new faces, the energy, the openness, they stayed. We invited them to speak about what had driven them away. Their stories became the foundation for our new employee handbook, One that didn't read like a legal threat, but like a promise. Toxicity wasn't just removed, it was replaced, rewritten, reversed. And the results spoke for themselves. Our innovation pipeline tripled. Employee retention rose by 30% in 6 weeks. A junior coder in R&D pitched a tool that got us an early meeting with a major federal agency. Even the board meetings felt different now. Purposeful. Alive. One afternoon, I returned to the same boardroom where I had once delivered the reckoning. But this time, I wasn't surrounded by predators. I was flanked by thinkers, doers, dreamers. Jasmine sat beside me. Serena and 2 new department heads across from me. Every single one of them was there because they earned it, and because someone finally saw them. Let's talk about Orion's future, I said. Not just in numbers, but in vision. No one smirked. No one postured. They just leaned forward, ready. This was the Orion I always meant to build. And finally, it was real. 6 months later, I stood by the large window of my office, the city humming below, Orion's name gleaming from the tower across the street, no longer just a symbol of technology, but of transformation. The numbers were in, profits had soared, legal matters had either been dismissed or resolved in our favor, and employee satisfaction surveys returned with results I once only dreamed of. But numbers weren't what made me pause. It was the quiet, the peace, the rare stillness that came not from exhaustion or silence, but from knowing I had built something that mattered, and I had taken it back. The last lawsuit against us had settled the week before, quietly and in our favor. The regulatory investigations into Nathan and the others continued, but they no longer touched Orion. My cooperation with the authorities had been swift and full. I hadn't played hero or martyr, I had simply told the truth. And in the end, the truth had been enough. Nathan was working at a high-end electronics store in the suburbs now. I knew because someone sent me a photo. He was behind the counter, wearing a polo shirt with the store's logo embroidered on the chest, his name tag pinned awkwardly like a wound. He had tried to sue again, but his legal team abandoned him after reviewing the growing list of evidence. Every door he once walked through with swagger was now sealed. I didn't respond to the photo. I didn't need to. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was confirmation. He had finally been forced to live without illusion, without status, without me. I wondered if he thought about the woman he once dismissed in front of his friends, the one he called unemployed, soft, irrelevant. I wondered if he knew how deeply he had misjudged the person sitting quietly beside him all those years. But even if he did, it didn't matter anymore. He was the past. I was already far beyond him. The new Orion didn't run on fear or hierarchy. It ran on voices that had once been silenced, now holding weight in every decision we made. Our AI division, under Jasmine's bold leadership, had just signed a landmark partnership with a health tech firm. The deal had come not from glossy presentations, but from the sincerity and precision of her ideas. I watched her step fully into her power, unbothered by what had once held her back. The creative department was now headed by Amina Das, who'd once been told she wasn't client-facing enough. She wore bright colors, refused to shrink herself, and still managed to pull in 3 major contracts in the last quarter. Watching her in pitch meetings was like witnessing a storm, beautiful, undeniable, impossible to contain. Even our interns had begun speaking up more. I sat in on their weekly presentations whenever I could, not to judge, but to listen. Some of their ideas had already been greenlit for pilot programs. They reminded me of myself, hungry, full of fire, just waiting for someone to give them room to burn. I turned from the window and looked at the wall where I had once kept my degrees and past achievements hidden, afraid they would tip my hand. Now, that space held something else entirely, a series of framed photographs, Orion's employees from across departments, candid and vibrant. A reminder of why I fought, why I stayed silent for so long, and why I eventually stopped. When people asked me now why I'd hidden my identity for so many years, I told them the truth. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. I had wanted to see the system from the inside, to understand what needed to be changed before I claimed the authority to do it. And when the time came, I didn't act out of vengeance. I acted out of necessity. Vengeance burns. Vision builds. I left the office early that day. Not to escape, but because I could. I walked through the building without the cloak of invisibility, greeting people by name, stopping to ask about projects, families, life outside these walls. The stairs were gone now, replaced by nods, warmth, connection. Downstairs in the lobby, the receptionist, same young woman who once barely looked at me, smiled as I passed. "See you tomorrow, Evelyn." "See you," I said, meaning it. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting everything in gold. I took a breath, long and deep, and let it fill me. This was mine. Not the company. Not just the success. The peace. The clarity. The knowing. I hadn't just reclaimed Orion. I had reclaimed myself.